Yo, hello guys and welcome. How's it going? In this video, we're going to be discussing the differences between Hex Ruin and Corrupt Intervention and discussing whether or not Corrupt Intervention is actually a good substitute for Ruin. Now, I know Hex Ruin is a really controversial perk in the game. It's not a very fun perk for survivors, and a lot of people seem to dislike it. But at the same time, a lot of killer players feel that it's necessary to run it to stop the gens from being done basically instantly, which is a very fair argument. I don't want to get into that discussion. I don't want to have a discussion on whether it's necessary or not. This video is more going to be comparing Hex Ruin to the other early game slowdown perk that I think is probably the most similar thing to Ruin, which is Corrupt Intervention. And we're going to talk about whether Corrupt Intervention is a viable substitute for Ruin, or whether it's just some garbage perk that you don't have to worry about. So first thing first, let me explain exactly why I'm comparing these two perks. Now, the way Hex Ruin works is it is an early game map pressure perk where you can literally just slap it on and you don't have to do anything to actually make the perk work. For instance, a lot of other regression perks that are in the game, such as like Pomp Goes the Weasel or Dying Light or Thanatophobia, you have to earn them in some way by either getting downs, injuring people, or like getting hooks. There's usually a way that you earn the progression, whereas Hex Ruin is a perk that you just kind of slap on and then literally right from the beginning of the game, you already get the help in the map pressure from it. The only other perk in the game that provides some sort of a game slowdown right off the beginning of the match without needing to do anything else is Corrupt Intervention. That is the only other perk. The second you spawn in, it blocks 3 generators, and they are blocked for 2 minutes, so it immediately kicks in the second you spawn. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to go out of your way to hit anybody, down anybody. You just immediately get the help the second you spawn in. Now, before I get into where I start actually comparing the two perks, I want to take a minute and talk about Corrupt Intervention a little bit more in depth and maybe talk about some things that you might not really realize about the perk at first glance. I want to make sure that we have a full understanding of the perk and all of its strengths and weaknesses before we actually get into the comparison, and I don't think I need to do the same thing for Hex Ruin because I'm pretty sure anybody that plays this game for longer than, maybe 5 or 10 hours probably knows about Hex Ruin and is well aware of the strengths and weaknesses of it. Okay, so Corrupt Intervention, let's take a look. Now, the actual description of it says that the 3 generators located farthest away from you are blocked by the entity for 120 seconds at the start of the trial. And that's it. That's the entire description. Now, when I first saw this, when it first came out, I was like, oh, that's not very good. That's only 2 minutes, and then your perk is gone forever, and then you have to play with 3 perks. Like, what's the point of that? That seems silly. And then when I started using it, and I started seeing people using it against me, I kind of realized some extra strengths that it has. So let's take a look at a map, an actual overhead of a map. This is Azrael's resting place. I pulled this right off of the official DBD wiki, so kudos to those guys. And this is the shape of Azrael's resting place, which is a pretty common map, and I'm going to use this as an example for my imagery of how this perk works. So let's spawn up some generators where generators usually spawn, and now let's give also an example of a potential spawn that you might get as a killer. Now, you can see if this is the spawn you get as a killer, these 3 gens on the bottom are the ones that are the furthest away, and they would get blocked by the entity. Now, if you're looking at this map now, you might realize that the only objectives are on the top half of the map. Basically, the 4 gens in the top half and the one in the middle are basically the entire effective map as far as you're concerned as a killer. You don't really need to worry about that area down there with the 3 block generators for a solid 2 minutes because they can't do anything productive down there. So not only are you preventing 3 gens from getting done, but you're also kind of like hurting the survivors to you at your spawn because they have to move away from those gens and come closer to you to do the ones that are available. I will say, however, that this is a bad combination if you want to run something like Noed, because obviously there's going to be doll totems that they can break, but essentially, aside from doll totems and maybe looting chests, there's not really anything else productive that they could possibly do on that side of the map. They're basically completely cut off. Now, there is always an option of the survivor stealthing for 2 minutes and not ever entering the actual active side of the map, but if that's the case as well, that is also beneficial to you as a killer, especially if you're a killer like Trapper or Hag or somebody that can take some time and set up your power and get ready for them to actually become available. This can also be really beneficial if you're playing a killer that maybe would be going for gen grabs or possibly trying to stalk someone on a generator, like, say, Ghostface. If you're playing a Ghostface that's trying to stalk people while they're working on gens, this would be very effective. There's less generators for you to need to patrol. You know there's only 4. The effective map is so much smaller. Same thing if you're trying to get a gen grab with Pig or any other scenario where you're trying to sneak up on a survivor or patrol generators in a sneaky way. Now, obviously, though, for killers that don't fit this criteria, the stealthing thing could definitely be a problem. This is definitely one of the downsides. If you're playing a killer such as, I don't know, Leatherface, Hillbilly, maybe Clown, you know, them stealthing on the other side of the map will make the perk basically useless. They could hypothetically stealth on the other side of the map, and then essentially the perk isn't useless, but it makes you have to venture off into a useless side of the map just to get anything done, which is not something you really want to do when you have Corrupt Intervention. But that kind of leads right into our last strength, which is kind of an interesting one. But hypothetically, if you did want to take chases into that side of the map where the 3 gens are blocked, you could actually use that to your advantage later in the game and try to set up like a 3-gen strat on those 3 gens that couldn't be worked on. So if you want to chase people into that side of the map, maybe break some pallets over there, get that side of the map weaker for like the late game, then you can maybe set up a strategy where you try to prevent those 3 gens from getting done in the late game and use that as a strategy to try to win, which is also an option. Corrupt is actually a very, very good strategic perk. It does a lot more than you might initially think when you first view the text, and I really think that people should give it more of a chance and try to experiment with it and see what kind of cool stuff that they can do with it. So now that we quickly covered the strengths of the perk, let's actually get into a comparison of Hex Ruin and Corrupt Intervention. Now, obviously, Hex Ruin is a perk that is a Hex perk, which ties it to a totem, and it makes it so that skill checks regress your gens. That's essentially the quick summary of what it does. I don't want to get into too much detail, because I'm pretty sure we're all aware. So, the strengths of this perk are that it is a very powerful, potent effect, and it makes it so that anybody that can't hit consistent, great skill checks is going to have a really rough time doing generators, and sometimes they'll go extremely, extremely slow. Another thing I would call a strength is the fact that it is a totem perk, which is interesting because I think it's both a strength and a weakness. But I've had a lot of games as Survivor or even as Killer where I have Hex Ruin and the Survivors just simply don't do gens because they're looking for the Ruin totem. Sometimes people will just completely ignore the gens and go searching for the totem, and sometimes if they can't find it, they'll spend 2, 3, 4 minutes not getting anything done and just trying to find the totem, and sometimes they won't. Which will go right into my last strength, which is the fact that it has the potential to last the entire match. Now, I don't think it's extremely likely, but it definitely does have the potential. I've had many games where Ruin will last the entirety of the match. Now, let's talk about the downfalls of Ruin. Now, first off, I think one that's very clear is that if the Survivors are actually good at hitting skill checks, and they're really good at nailing great skill checks, they can just ignore Hex Ruin and just blast through generators anyway, and sometimes they'll just get gens done so fast that you won't even realize that you had Ruin active at all. Luckily, I find this to be pretty rare. You don't find groups of survivors like this very often, but when you do run into a group of survivors like this, it's very disheartening because you feel like your perk just didn't even exist at all. And the other major downside, which I'm sure is the one that everybody is thinking, is that it is a totem perk and it can be broken at any point. I'm sure all of us have had these matches where you spawn into the map and you see your totem on the other side of the map and you're like, can I even get there before it gets broken? And then you can't. It just gets broken within like 15 seconds. Let me go ahead and use my main man, OhTofu, as an example for this because he made a video that was kind of a meme video that described exactly this.
Now, into the game we go. You see that ruin over there? It's gonna disappear in 10 seconds from now. You'll be able to watch the VOD later and count 10 seconds, and that's how long it will take for it to actually blow the fuck up.
Honestly, fucking tragic. But anyway, let's move on to Corrupt Intervention. Now, Corrupt Intervention has a lot of strengths and weaknesses as well. The first most obvious strength is that it has a consistent timer. Unlike Ruin, there's no chance of Corrupt Intervention disappearing within 10 seconds of the match. No matter what, Corrupt Intervention will be active for 2 minutes if you're running it. There will be 2 minutes where 3 gens are blocked and nothing can stop that. Another solid strength is what we discussed before, where Corrupt Intervention basically cuts off an entire portion of the map. If you're running Corrupt Intervention, the map practically gets cut in half almost, and you don't really have to worry about an entire segment of the map that is completely blocked off where the survivors can't really do anything productive. Which, again, helps a lot if you're a low mobility killer or a stealth killer or any other killer that can use this to your advantage, possibly like a trap killer. A lot of killers can use a smaller map to their advantage. That is a very, very big benefit to playing any killer. And the last strength of this perk is probably the one where you can set up a 3-gen strat in the late game with, appropriate killers. Now, this is something that isn't extremely reliable, but it is something you can do, and Corrupt Intervention will help a lot in that endeavor. Honestly, I'd be willing to bet that there's probably a lot of other cool uses for this perk too that I just haven't thought of yet. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know every little thing about this game. I'm sure a lot of creative people out there might be able to come up with some other things that might be really useful with this perk, and I'm really excited to see what other people can do if this perk gets more use. Now, the downsides of this perk are pretty obvious. I think the first one is that it only lasts 2 minutes, and after 2 minutes, it's gone. There is literally zero chance that this perk will last the entire match, I guess, unless you kill them all in 2 minutes. But assuming you have like a regular length match, there's literally zero chance that this perk will last the whole time. After 2 minutes, you will be left with 3 perks, and you'll essentially just have to finish out the game with only 3 perks as opposed to 4. The other downside I would say is that it's not really the best perk on all killers. This is definitely the kind of perk that is way more effective on certain killers than maybe other ones that it would be less effective on. And the last major downfall, which is probably one of the most important ones, to be honest with you, I don't know why I'm mentioning it last, is that there is a chance that you can get a bad spawn and it'll block off gens that aren't necessarily ideal. So, you know what? For this one, I'm actually going to pull that little image back up and I'll show you an example of a spawn that would block bad generators, like maybe right smack in the middle of the map. Let's say hypothetically you spawn here and then these 3 generators get blocked. That does not really do much for you. There's not really any, like it does a little bit for you, but it kind of takes away a lot of that 3-gen strategy. It takes away a lot of that cutting off an entire section of the map strategy. It becomes a lot less useful. So it's not 100% reliable in its strengths. But I will tell you, having run Corrupt Intervention often, this doesn't happen extremely often. I would say most games you get a good spawn and you cut off an entire section of the map. So with all this in mind, I think it's time for me to give my final thoughts. So Corrupt Intervention is definitely a good perk. I don't think it's a bad perk. It is definitely a very strong perk, but it definitely does have its flaws as well, and it's not a kind of perk that fits into every single scenario that you would want. Whereas Hex Ruin you can probably slap on any killer and it's going to do well. Corrupt Intervention is definitely more useful on some killers rather than others. I do think that if you're finding yourself being frustrated by your totem being broken very, very early, I know this happens to me a lot, and sometimes I think to myself, why am I even running Hex Ruin? This perk is useless. Corrupt Intervention is a very good substitute that will make you actually be like, yeah, I'm definitely getting value out of this perk, no matter what. But in the end, if I'm going to be 100% honest with you guys, I do think Ruin is a slightly stronger perk. I think most games that you play, Ruin is going to pack a much more of a punch and is going to do a really good job of slowing the game down. But, however, like I said, if you are looking for something a lot more consistent, because I know that's a big thing, a lot of people like to play their games a lot more consistently. I know a lot of games, it's like if your Ruin goes down in the first 10 seconds, you lose, whereas if the Ruin lasts a long time, you win. If you want to have more consistency in your play, I think Corrupt Intervention is a slightly weaker, but way more consistent perk that you can run, and I would definitely recommend trying it out. I want to also mention that you should not run these two side by side. Like, you shouldn't run them in the same build. I know a lot of people are probably thinking, why not just stack both? But if you remember what we said before about making the survivors like move around and not do the generators, that's just going to give them more of a chance to find your Ruin, and I don't think these are good perks to run together. I think it's a one or the other kind of perk. Something I also want to say at the very end, this isn't really that important, but I kind of just want to get it out there because it's a thought I have, is I know that Ruin is a perk that a lot of survivors find to be not fun, which again, when it comes to this game, I don't really concern myself a lot with balance as much as I concern things with fun. I think the game needs to be fun, and I really, really hope that the developers agree with this, because I think going forward, this game is not a competitive game. It's a very casual game, and I think most people know that. And I think that everything should be focused on being fun. I don't think it really matters if a certain character or a certain perk is strong, as long as it's fun to go against. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And I want to throw out there that as a survivor, I think it's way better to go against Corrupt Intervention than Hex Ruin. I could be wrong. If you disagree with me, feel free to let me know. But as a survivor, I would much rather have to run into the map a little bit more to do a generator rather than feeling like doing a gen is going backwards. So I do think that Corrupt Intervention is actually a better designed perk for the overall health of the game as well. I know that's not really that relevant, and I know like people are still going to run Ruin no matter what, and like, you know, it doesn't really matter, but I just think it's important to keep that in mind, that Corrupt is a very, very good perk overall. I think they did a fantastic job with it. And I think this is the point in the video where I realize that I'm ranting too much and I'm saying the same things over and over again, so I think I'm going to use this as an opportunity to get the hell out of here. And I want to say thank you guys so much for tuning into this video, and thank you so much for listening and hanging out with me. If you guys have any thoughts about this perk, please let me know in the comments. I love discussing with people, as long as you're able to keep it civil and don't try to put each other down. I am way more than happy to have a discussion about this, so feel free to let me know in the comments. Like the video if you guys enjoyed it, and sub to the channel if you want as well. No pressure, though. And thank you guys for hanging out. I'm getting out of here. Hope you guys have a good one. See you later. I'm out of here. See ya. Take care. See ya. I'm out of here. See ya. I'll see you later. See ya.